In a town where charm and diplomacy are survival tools, Debbie Reynolds stood out for being almost universally adored. But behind her glittering smile and wholesome reputation was a private bitterness she rarely let slip. Because there was one man, one actor she loathed more than anyone else she had ever met in Hollywood. This wasn't your typical rivalry or a short-lived disagreement. This was something deeper, colder, a grudge that lasted decades and never healed. The most surprising part? This man wasn't a rival starlet or an unfaithful lover. He was a respected, award-winning actor, someone you'd never expect to spark that kind of venom from America's sweetheart. And once you hear what happened between them, it's hard not to wonder, just how far does forgiveness really go? Debbie Reynolds had the kind of image publicists dream about: bright-eyed, energetic, and impossibly wholesome. From the moment she danced her way across the screen in Singin' in the Rain, audiences fell in love. She was the girl next door in an industry full of scandals. Even when tabloids tried to drag her name into Hollywood drama, she always came out polished and poised. But that sunny exterior, as beloved as it was, didn't tell the whole story. Debbie Reynolds was no pushover. Behind the charm was someone who had been burned publicly, privately, and repeatedly, and she learned early on how to draw lines that wouldn't be crossed. She forgave a lot. She endured even more. But there was one man who never made it off her blacklist. One name that, even decades later, still made her go silent. To the public, Debbie Reynolds was invincible, graceful in every role, upbeat in every interview. But behind the scenes, her life was anything but easy. Her first marriage ended in betrayal, so public it became tabloid history. Eddie Fisher, the man she married and started a family with, left her for her best friend Elizabeth Taylor. Then came a second husband who gambled away not just his fortune, but hers too, leaving Debbie to claw her way out of debt in her later years. Her third marriage, meant to be a fresh start, only dragged her deeper into disappointment. Through it all, she kept smiling, working, performing. But those who knew her best saw a woman hardened by pain, sharp-witted, and unafraid to speak her mind when it truly mattered. She didn't hold grudges lightly, but when she did, they ran deep. And no grudge went deeper than the one she held against Walter Brennan. Walter Brennan was Hollywood royalty in his own right: 3 Oscars, a respected presence on and off screen, and a reputation as one of the industry's most dependable character actors. But behind the camera, Brennan was fiercely opinionated, blunt, and according to some, impossible to get along with if you disagreed with his views. Debbie Reynolds wasn't one to pick fights, but when she crossed paths with Brennan during a project in the early 60s, something snapped. It wasn't just a personality clash, it was personal. Those close to the production whispered about a confrontation that turned ugly. Reynolds, known for her restraint, reportedly left the set in tears. Brennan, on the other hand, laughed it off. But from that day forward, Debbie refused to work with him, refused to speak his name, and according to a longtime friend, never forgave what he said to her behind closed doors. The incident was never publicized. No interviews, no headlines, just silence, until now. The moment between Debbie Reynolds and Walter Brennan that shattered any chance of civility didn't happen in front of cameras. It happened off-set, during a break in filming, when tensions were already running high. Debbie was advocating for better treatment of one of the younger female co-stars, someone Brennan had dismissed as a nobody with no future. When Reynolds stepped in, calmly but firmly, Brennan didn't take it well. According to someone who witnessed it, he turned to her and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "You were never more than a studio puppet, Debbie. And no one cares what a washed-up song and dance girl thinks." The words hit like a slap. Debbie, who had spent years rebuilding her life and reputation after devastating public betrayals, stood there in silence. She didn't yell. She didn't cry, not until she was alone. But after that day, she never spoke to Brennan again. No formal complaint, no media drama, just a quiet, permanent wall. For someone who was known to forgive even her worst enemies, it was clear. This wasn't just about a single insult. It was about years of being underestimated, dismissed, and finally deciding she'd had enough. Walter Brennan had the kind of career most actors could only dream of. He was respected, awarded, and remembered for roles that defined the Western and drama genres. But behind the accolades was a man whose opinions often alienated those around him. Colleagues described him as unyielding, old school, and difficult, especially toward women who spoke up. Debbie Reynolds wasn't the only one to clash with him, but she may have been the only one who never looked back. There were stories, quiet ones, about Brennan's behind-the-scenes behavior. He reportedly refused to take direction from younger filmmakers and was known to voice controversial political and social views on set. While the studio system shielded him from public backlash, those who worked closely with him often came away with a different perspective. Reynolds, with her signature poise, never aired the details publicly. But those in her circle knew she considered Brennan one of the few people in Hollywood who crossed a line she couldn't overlook. Years later, when asked in a quiet interview if there was anyone in Hollywood she regretted working with, she smiled softly and said, "Only one, and I don't say his name." Debbie Reynolds mastered the Hollywood balancing act, being real without revealing too much. She built a legacy on resilience, always showing up with a smile, even when her world was falling apart. That control extended to how she handled her feud with Walter Brennan. She could have exposed him. She had the platform, the audience, and the receipts, but she didn't. Not because she was afraid, because she chose grace over spectacle. Reynolds believed in preserving the dignity of her career. Public feuds. Ugly headlines, they weren't her style. But privately, her message was clear. She would never work with Brennan again, and she would never pretend to respect a man who disrespected her. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. In an industry that often forced women to stay quiet, Debbie used her silence as power. She kept the feud out of the press, but not out of her memory, and those closest to her knew it was the one wound she never truly let go of. As Debbie Reynolds aged, she became a living archive of Hollywood's golden era, filled with stories, heartbreak, and wisdom that spanned decades. In interviews and memoirs, she spoke openly about her divorces, financial troubles, even near-death experiences. But when it came to certain chapters like Walter Brennan, she remained intentionally vague. Still, those who spent time with her in her final years say she never forgot. And more importantly, she never forgave. During a private conversation just a year before her passing, a longtime friend asked if she ever wished she'd confronted Brennan publicly. Debbie's answer was simple. Number. He'd love the attention. Silence was the only thing he couldn't argue with. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. Debbie had spent her life finding peace with the past, but not everything needed closure in the traditional sense. Some wrongs, she believed, were best remembered quietly so they wouldn't be repeated. In her later years, she found joy in her children, her fans, and her legacy, not in rehashing old battles. But even then, if Brennan's name ever came up, she'd pause, and her smile would vanish, if only for a second. Debbie Reynolds was a woman defined by resilience. She survived heartbreaks that could have broken anyone else, faced public humiliation with grace, and rebuilt her life time and again. But even the strongest have their limits. Walter Brennan was her breaking point, the one person she never forgave, never forgot, and never softened toward. Their feud wasn't just a Hollywood clash, it was a clash of values, wounds, and unspoken scars. It's tempting to think of Debbie as the eternal optimist, always ready to forgive and move on, and she was almost always. But her story reminds us that sometimes, forgiveness isn't about hatred or anger. Sometimes, it's about knowing your worth and refusing to accept disrespect no matter who it comes from. For Debbie Reynolds, that line was drawn clearly and permanently. And maybe that's why, despite decades of challenges, she remained one of Hollywood's brightest stars, because she never let anyone dim her light, especially not Walter Brennan.